Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Another week goes by here. It's Rick Wagner getting it right here on KNZ, KGLN, and other places. Right here at 1100 and 980 in that order for KNZZ and KGLN, and then 92.7 and 101.3 on the old FM dial on the internet at the same time, and our podcast that you can locate by going to our website, therickwagnershow.com. A lot of stuff there, a lot of news. Feel free to browse. If you feel like you're getting depressed or angry, go outside, have some iced tea. You'll be better off. All right, yeah, so another week here. Let's see. A lot of things going on here. Trump's still president. That's a good thing. It's apparently irritating a lot of people. People blowing up Teslas still, which is a disgusting show of something. What do you think that really shows? What's the message there? I mean, we know what they think they're doing, but I mean, what's really? I mean, some innocent person, either someone that owns a car or has a car dealership, something like that. You're just stealing from them, or at least the insurance company. Assume the insurance company are going to keep covering them. And you think, oh, I'm really showing Elon Musk. No, you're not. I mean, it upsets him. He doesn't like it. But you're not gonna bankrupt him. You know, this is only one of his businesses. These people just, all they're doing is hurting people to try and make some kind of point. And I've tried to figure out what the point is, and it's very difficult to figure out. This one guy that did the firebombing, but they just latched on to this other guy, I want to say Thursday. And going through his affiliations was interesting. One of the news sources listed them as he was affiliated with the Communist Party of America, the Palestinian liberation of some sort, and in other words, just kind of like everything that doesn't like whatever the West is doing. Not even consistent. And my supposition is that if you drug this character out, gave him a shave, bath, set him down, and said, okay, remember the Communist Party, you're very happy about that. Tell me what you think communism is. What is it? What kind of government would you have if you had a communist system? How would that be different than what we have? How would it be better? I don't know why nobody ever asks these questions of people that pop up with this stuff. It seems to me like a great follow-up question. Senator Chris Coons, one of the more low IQ people, if that is possible, and still be able to talk in the Senate, was asked about Doge, of course, and Social Security. And his answer was pretty much the same, it's just even dumber, well, I've been hearing a lot of complaints from people about, that they can't access their Social Security, and they call in and they do this and that. No, you haven't. You heard that from someplace else. And then he said, these unelected people that have access to this pretty much, really everybody in the Social Security Administration is unelected, right? Who's been doing this all along. What is that? So what is that supposed to mean, this unelected thing? And look at you. You're elected. Would I want you messing around with my stuff? No, of course not. But it doesn't even make sense. So is your point that everybody that works in administrative capacity at a executive branch of the government should be elected? And who should elect them? How should that go? Should they be elected from where their office is? It's childlike. when you get to it. And nobody wants to ask follow-up questions. Like, really, who, for example? Who's contacted you? Well, people contacted. So these are all anonymous? Well, I can just answer the questions. Well, I don't have it at my fingertips. Okay, well, why don't you do this is let us have some of the contact information. We'll ask them if they'd like to talk to us about their problem. And you know what the answer would be? Oh, I can't do that because, see, that's, it's confidential. That's what it is. Well, why don't you have one of your many staff members that we pay for, send them an email or a text or a smoke signal, whatever it takes, and say, hey, you're having this problem. The media would like to talk to you about your problem. See who you are and what the problem is, and maybe you could get it fixed. Would you be interested in that? If they're not, they could write back and say, no, thanks. Are you going to do that? No, of course they're not going to do that. Because most of the people that they claim are complaining don't exist. There's plenty of people that complain, don't get me wrong. Not nearly as many as they would have you believe. But it's just a trope, right? It's what they say. It's very much like the reporters' questions. And I've pointed this out before, this Canadian, the Conservative Party leader in Canada, who I really like, in terms of how he handles things. A year ago, they were asking him about, something with Donald Trump and, if he liked his policies and so forth. And they phrased it in this way, and you'll hear reporters do this a lot. People are saying, and it goes right past the person answering the question. It doesn't get past him. And what people? Well, people. Well, what people? It says, well, we talked to, hey, it's your question, supposedly coming from other people. Who are these other people? Well, of course, both sides of that question know that there isn't an other people per se. Well, maybe another guy in the newsroom. It's just as the same side of the politics as I am. But there isn't other people. They're making them up. And if there were other people, and I'm sure they could find some people to complain and ask this question, then someone might ask them what they meant by that. And it wouldn't be the same thing perhaps that the reporter says. So it's always a nebulous kind of thing. Remember, we always talk about they this and they that. Well, they shouldn't have done this. And who's they? Well, the government. Which government? Which part of the government? You need to know what you're talking about a little bit. You should ask yourself that question. Well, what if they ask me who this is? Well, who is it? Well, what kind of answer would I give? But see, they're not even ready for that because nobody does that. They let them phrase the question as though this is a prevailing question in the electorate out there. The American people would like to know. Really? What American people? As all kinds of American people. So what ones are you referencing? From your district? Is that what you mean? Your people from your district have been calling you? Okay. Well, that's interesting. We'd like to talk to some of them. That sounds like an interesting interview, Does anybody do that? Of course not. They're not interested in it. It's maddening if you just stop and think about it for a minute. I think that the new press secretary with Caroline was very good. I'm talking to Caitlin Collins, who is far and away the smuggest reporter, certainly at CNN, probably at any of the major networks. Asked something about, was there any evidence of that? And she does talk about something. Is there any evidence of that? And John said, that would be a good question. You're a reporter. Maybe you should find out. Right? And it was like shocking. What do you mean me find out? You mean like go ask regular people? Well, that's not it. We sit around. Here's how this happens. We sit around and complain about you, and then we try and come up with gotcha questions or weird questions that aren't really questions but are speeches, and we come in here and throw them out. We don't do any actual, interviewing regular people. I mean, who wants to talk to regular people from CNN? You don't want to talk to regular people. Regular people don't think like you. I mean, many of them don't even live in Manhattan or in downtown Atlanta. So why would you want to talk to them? That's a feeling you get. We'll be back. Hey, folks, thanks for sticking with us. We're right back here. Rick Wagner getting it right. And, we were talking a little bit in the last segment about what people really mean when they say things. We're talking mainly about reporters when they ask questions and things like that. And about how there's this incredibly irritating situation where nobody follows up on anything. And even the reporters that are supposedly on, the conservative side, why don't you ask these people, what do they mean by that? That should be over the doorway of every, sort of newsroom, if you want to call them that. But isn't that the question you really want to know sometimes when you're listening to these guys? You hear the rhetoric, but what do you mean by that? What is that supposed to mean? I mean, it sounds ornery, or it sounds like some sort of condemnation. But what do you mean by it? Or give me an example of it. For instance, Doge with Elon Musk just wants to get rid of federal employees so that they can cut taxes for billionaires, or that they can somehow enrich the billionaires. How exactly is that going to work? If that's true, I'd like to know about it. How does that work? I mean, and they'll stumble around you, and you want to say, well, you said it. You must be able to explain it. How does that work? Now, sometimes they're smart enough just to completely tell you untruths. There's a couple of politicians on there that have said things that are demonstrably and obviously not true when they get pressed a little bit. Social Security, stuff like they're going to kick people off Social Security. They can, Okay, what people? Well, people. The 120-year-old people, you mean, that may or may not be receiving benefits? The 11-year-olds that received grants from the Small Business Administration. What people are you specifically referencing? Could you give us some examples? You're very well educated on this because you've said this many times, and so you obviously know what you're talking about, so let's just get into it. Let's get right down into it. This is your chance to lay it out. All of this work and this research and these particularities and fundamentals that you have come up with to reach this position, this is your chance. Educate people. Come on. I think you know how that would go most of the time. Because they're just catchisms. They're not actual thoughts. Or certainly not demonstrable pieces of opinion. But we just let that slide by all the time. And it has to stop. Somebody has to ask them what they mean by that. Who said that? Things like that. The stuff that if you were talking to a friend and they said, well, I've heard that such and such. Most of the time, if they said something like that, you say, well, who told you that? Right? You wouldn't think twice about it. Well, who told you that? It's the same thing. It doesn't come up in the questions that the people get or ask. You don't ask the question back. Well, I could answer it a lot better if I knew something about the context. Who said that? But what did they mean by that? And then if someone else is saying something, say they're giving a speech or something, and a news person interviews them, and they have these vague rhetorical flourishes, what does that mean? Who are you talking about? Do you have some examples? Now, if you're smart, you'll have some examples of some of this stuff, because there's nothing that government does or doesn't do or gets changed that you can't find someone that is impacted by it. I mean, this is true because there are so many, right? There's so many people that are in this mix that you're going to find someone who is impacted by some change in policy that you feel sorry that shouldn't happen to them. It doesn't matter what the policy is, what side of the aisle it comes from, as they like to say, any of that stuff. You're going to find somebody. So if you really are wanting to make these points, you'd have a couple of people out there in your pocket. Now, many times it doesn't work very well because there are other things about these people and why they're in this problem that you don't want other people to know about, so you just should not name them. But let's say you do have them. So the fact that you won't even do that, you won't even look up a couple of people so you can have some examples if somebody asks you, that means that you're just really lazy. And you know how you got lazy? Because the people you're talking to have allowed you to be lazy. Probably because they're lazy. They haven't done their own homework. If they did, they'd want to know more about it. Like I said, if someone said something about you, you were in a conversation, chances are you'd want to know who said it. And if they said something that was somehow in your ballpark or your pew there, you'd say, well, what do you mean by that? You know, what do you mean we're ripping off the little guy? Who's the little guy and who's ripping him off and how are they doing it? Give me something here. How can I work with you and discuss something if I don't really know what you're talking about? But each side assumes that it's all just, in the air, right?
Seriously, though?
Yeah, hold on a second here. I want to...
Seriously, though?
Hold on a second here. I'm going to... I have something queued up here. It's playing by itself. This is something I wanted you guys to listen to. This is John Cleese from Monty Python, the comedic group you may be familiar with. And he has this great piece he did a few years ago on extremism. And it's not even politically charged for either side. It's very interesting, and it really gives you something to think about. I'm going to play it here so you guys can listen to it. He's sitting down and he says, seriously, folks.
A nastier, harsher atmosphere everywhere, more abuse and bother boy behavior, less friendliness and tolerance and respect for opponents. All right, but what we never hear about extremism is its advantages. Well, the biggest advantage of extremism is that it makes you feel good because it provides you with enemies. Let me explain. The great thing about having enemies is that you can pretend that all the badness in the whole world is in your enemies and all the goodness in the whole world is in you. Attractive, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of anger and resentment in you anyway, and you therefore enjoy abusing people, then you can pretend that you're only doing it because these enemies of yours are such very bad persons. And that if it wasn't for them, you'd actually be good-natured and courteous and rational all the time. So, if you want to feel good, become an extremist. Okay, now you have a choice. If you join the hard left, they'll give you their list of authorized enemies. Almost all kinds of authority, especially the police, the city, Americans, judges, multinational corporations, public schools, furriers, newspaper owners, fox hunters, generals, class traitors, and, of course, moderates. Or, if you'd rather be an extremist on the hard right, no problem, fine, you still get a lovely list of enemies, only they're different ones. Noisy minority groups, unions, Russia, weirdos, demonstrators, welfare sponges, meddlesome clergy, peaceniks, the BBC, strikers, social workers, communists, and, of course, moderates. And upstart actors. Now, once you're armed with one of these super lists of enemies, you can be as nasty as you like and yet feel your behaviors morally justified. So you can strut around abusing people and telling them you could eat them for breakfast and still think of yourself as a champion of the truth, a fighter for the greater good, and not the rather sad paranoid schizoid that you really are.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? Someone pointed that out to me the other day, and I had to play it for you guys because it's so true. When you stop and think about it, it's like, okay, that's not even hard to visualize. And John Cleese, because he has, he's got a brilliant mind, a brilliant comedic mind, and I think he's a very intelligent guy anyway, manages to put it in that, and it's kind of humorous, and it's so true. If you want to abuse people and you're unhappy with yourself and your lot in life and you're jealous of other people or some mix of that, and you want to lash out, you have to how do you do that? Well, I have to have a vehicle, don't I? So I have to get in this vehicle of political ideology. And because I'm so upset, I have to be an extremist in it. And then I'm a fighter for the justice of this piece. I'm right. And everything that's wrong with the world and wrong with me in my life is these other people. That's it. Oh, yeah. Now I understand it. It's not me. It's like the system. And you can feel self-righteous by doing that. We all kind of feel this way. I mean, I think we kind of know that in a sense if you think about it. But Cleese just did a great job of articulating it, didn't he? I mean, in a kind of humorous way. And the one thing that I sort of enjoyed is that both sides agree on one thing. They don't like moderates, right? Because what is a moderate? I'm not sure, once again, so we're talking about definitions. I'm not exactly sure what a moderate is. When someone says they're a moderate, let's say Democrat or Republican, once again, couldn't you say, what do you mean by that? You mean you're moderate on, there's a position that has kind of like an extreme piece to it, or what you perceive to be an extreme piece on it, and then you kind of moderate that in some way? Right? You believe it, but not as strongly? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I agree with that, but not as strongly as I could, or I don't believe this is what you do. All very interesting. Something to think about. All right, folks, thanks for sticking with us down around the horn of the hour, as I like to think of it. I want to do something a little bit different than we have in the past. Is I have Cody Kennedy on, and Cody is a present city councilman here in Grand Junction, an area which I disparage a lot, but I do live here, and my family's been here a long time, so. I am interested, and I'm always telling you folks out there to get involved in local politics and do things and this and that. So I thought I'd actually, take my own advice and talk about this a little bit. Now, you people that are other places, and I know there's a lot of you that are outside this area, you live someplace that has a local government, right? And you need to pay attention to it because it's all very interesting to take a look at Washington, D.C. and that kind of stuff. And occasionally, if you're, a masochist enough, you look at the state's legislature and stuff. But really, the most immediate effect you get is from your municipal and county government. They're the ones that do all the goofy things that you complain about 80% of the time. And I want to point out, you need to do a little research in who you put in these things. As I've mentioned before, Joe Biden's first job was city councilman in Wilmington, Delaware. If somebody would have stopped him then, think how much better off we'd be. So, anyway, we got Cody Kennedy on. Cody's on the council now. Cody, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, I think it's an important time. I think people feel like there's a shift in attitudes about things lately, and they're paying more attention to this. I also know that here locally on this next ballot, which I think is supposed to be returned, I think I've got myself confused. Is it April 7th?
8th.
8th?
Yep, April 8th.
I'm sorry.
So basically, it's April 8th.
April 8th. Okay, Tuesday. Good. All right. I'm sorry. I don't want to mislead anybody. So, but one of the things on the ballot is about changing the date of the elections to coincide with a regular election cycle. Instead of having them in off years at off times, like April, they would be at when a regular election is, which is like, say, the first Tuesday in November, whatever that might be. And
right,
I like the idea because I think you get better turnout. And you do them in non-presidential years, but that's the same time that we do governors and other, miscreants. And so I think it would get more participation because people are just more likely to pay attention at that and maybe have an opinion about things they should have an opinion about anyway. So how do you stand on that? Do you appreciate that? Is that what somebody would do?
Absolutely, 100%. And it will also save the city a lot of money in the way the election is run and how much additional money we're just putting out to run that whole election process. But ultimately, it's that voter participation that matters so dang much. In our little city of Grand Junction, we're about 70,000 residents, about 44,800 registered voters. Last time I talked to the elections office about that, and in the last election that I was in, which was 2 years ago, I'm only 2 years from my election because I filled a vacancy. So when I went through my election, there was only 17,000 people that voted, and that's pretty bad, pretty darn pathetic. And to your point about kind of who votes and how they vote, I obviously there are some local progressive groups that knock a lot of doors that get a certain flavor of voter engaged, and that gets them a certain result.
Sure, there's a lot of the voters out there that have a sign in front of their house that says "Hate doesn't live here" and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
they will probably not show that side of their personality if you show up canvassing for Trump. So it's always an interesting position. We mean it, but only if you do what we want.
Right.
But,
right.
and I think that's true. And one of the advantages for when you live in a relatively conservative area like this is in having non-identifiable elections where you don't let people run with party affiliation, is that people don't really know who's who.
Right.
And they have a difficult time deciding what your philosophy might be. And, if you attached a D or an R to it, people would have some idea. And wherever you're in a conservative district, the Democrats never want to have that. Because just what you say, they are organized people. I mean, that's their reaction to everything is to, we need to get together and make a sign. And so they'll turn some people out. And many of them have a constituency built in. For instance, if you're a city employee, you're a constituency for a certain kind of candidate. If you're a District 51 employee, you're certainly a candidate for that. And you're going to get communicated with. You're going to go through your union, you're going to go through your group, whatever the case might be. And those are going to usually have a particular viewpoint. And so the person who isn't necessarily representing that viewpoint has a little harder work to do because there's sort of a built-in amount of voters for that other point of view. So it's something that we have to realize, to do that. And we're not able to recognize people's philosophy just by, a single letter by their name now.
Sure. And it does encourage people to engage in the process and get to know candidates better. I do, even though I'm definitely a conservative person. I'm a registered Republican. I do like that we have a nonpartisan election here, and I hope people get to know their candidates. I have a strong feeling that the closer an election is to your front door, the more impact it has on your day-to-day life. And I really would love to see our community engage in our local election with the type of vigor that they do in our presidential election.
Yes, and I think that's a common enough thing. People hear so much of national politics that they're always triggered by it, and they hear less about local unless something really crazy is going on. And so they don't feel like they have enough information many times, and so that lowers their participation because, national stuff you pick up something from just osmosis from when you're consuming other news sources. For instance, I read the Daily Mail every day, and I'm very familiar with how 2 or 3 British celebrities are getting along in their lives, and I don't have any idea who they are. But it just kind of soaks in. And so I think this kind of comes over to the election side of it. Telling people that you're a Republican there's nothing wrong with that because it identifies you with a certain, that's gotten to be a pretty broad range of views. But nevertheless, it helps people do a little bit more. And these races are not a well-paid position, so people traditionally don't spend a lot of money on them, and it makes it difficult because of that to get your message out. Because if someone's spending $10,000 to get elected to a job that they get $500 a month for, I got to wonder why. Are they just bored, or what's the story there? But at the same time, we don't get enough information otherwise. So it's difficult.
It is. I've certainly been asked that. I mean, I'm a longtime resident of Grand Junction. I worked for our police department for 17 years. About half of that as a detective, and loved serving our community. During the last 25 years, my wife, who was a school teacher while I was a cop, we were buying little rental houses and we'd live in them and buy another one. And so we was doing that all those years as well, which allowed me to have some latitude to retire a little earlier than I otherwise might have, but loved serving Grand Junction. So when people are like, what's your angle? What's your motivation? People are always assuming that's there. And I can tell you in my case, it's not. I don't have an aspiration for another office. I'm not trying, there's no profit from this. I really should pay more attention to my own business than I do, but I spend, 30, 40 hours a week doing council stuff. So thankfully I have the flexibility to do that. And it is a thankless job for sure. But I love my community. I've met a lot of amazing people. So that's there. But when you talk about spending money, and I've raised about 25,000 so far for this election, and spending it rather quickly on mailers and radio time, that type of thing. It is the drive to do that comes from not wanting the other side to win, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Not giving in to seeing policies take our city in a direction. And I know your listeners are from all over. And I know you lived in Boulder once upon a time, but I just don't want to see our community turn into Boulder.
No, and it's quite easy to do because the state's turning into California. At least on the other side of the mountain it is. And the only thing that's really saved us from that is Tabor, which is, mentioning Tabor to Democrats is sort of like, throwing holy water at vampires. And so it's not good. So, but we have a pretty conservative base over here. I like to think of a sensible base. And I remember when you were with the police department, when I was with the sheriff's department.
Yep.
So.
And you mentioned, and I'm sure your listeners are well educated and probably know what Tabor is, but it's that taxpayer bill of rights, and the city did what we call de-Bruced a few years ago, and there's plenty of stories behind how the politics with that went. But it's a significant it's a consideration when you think about how the city grows their budget and grows the amount of their employees, and how we continue to do that, and we don't necessarily pause for a minute and say, should we? It seems like we just continue to look for opportunities to grow that budget.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. And the city only partially de-Bruced. You still have to ask people if you raise their taxes. You can completely de-Bruce if that's possible, but only a maniac would do that, which means several places on the eastern front have done that. But yeah, so there's a few things like returning excess funds and things like that from Tabor that the city's managed to get rid of so that they can do whatever it is they do with it. Buy these parking meters downtown, apparently. What was wrong with the parking meters before? Is it, not to jump into that, but
gosh. Yeah, well, I've parking meters is something I've spent some time on just because I've talked to a lot of people, and that was something that upset the residents. I heard a lot of pushback when we were changing the hours on them. Extending the hours from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., which of course people that want to come downtown to eat dinner, that hits them directly. And thankfully the city did roll that back. So that was a win. But with these new parking meters, there are these, the type of meters that you can, you get an app and you can pay with your credit card, and the city can collect it, not have to collect the change, even though it does still take change. A lot of people pay electronically, and it's easy to reprogram. So there are some efficiencies there. But there has been a lot of people that are just not happy with our downtown parking situation and those meters in particular.
It's a little complex, and it's just the sort of thing that, a lot of people in communities that stick with them, when sometimes more apparent or fiscally larger things will elude them, but they see that every day. And you do have to have, I think, probably at least a certificate in computer programming to be able to operate them effectively. And a lot of people, older people or people who don't want to be bothered, aren't crazy about having to have an app and am I in zone this and this, that. So, I think it's interesting. But I also know that the city retrieves revenue from that, which is, of course, the main reason they exist, apparently. And that I remember when I was with the county going over one time because we were just trying to figure some things out on parking and this and that, and asking the city, how much do you collect off your parking meters? And it was like I was one of the Rosenbergs, and I was saying, so this hydrogen bomb, how do you make one? There's not a lot of free flow of information when you ask stuff like that. It's so people get very suspicious of that.
Yes, and I get that, but it's really, I think it's more to the point. It's kind of death by a thousand cuts when it comes to parking downtown, and then of course all the changes to our downtown streets with all the bike lanes and the reduction of traffic or the bottlenecking of traffic as it is. So it's those things that we hear about a lot. And I get, like, the argument on the other side with the parking is that, a lot of what the meters do isn't as much of a revenue driver as it is really managing that downtown parking, keeping people moving. So you don't have, let's say, an employee of the store next door to you parking in front of your business all day long while they work at the store next door to you, where your customers might want to park. The way it's been explained to me, and I get that, that's again, that where this is someone's philosophy and the way that they share it. So, but yeah, with that and like I say, our downtown streets and now, they're eyeballing our beautiful historic 7th Street.
Oh, God.
All that is not making our community very happy with City Council.
No, I don't, and I understand where they get the motivation for that. I mean, what problem are they solving? What group of people have come forward to say that we need to put up little plastic cones? I haven't seen them.
Rick, come on, you've got to, the problem is out there, right? It's climate change, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek for your listeners, right? It's climate change. We're burning up the world. So, hey, we got to quit driving. And what better place to start with than your downtown, right? So for me, making it inconvenient to drive and encouraging people to bike and having less parking when we put in, apartments and businesses. And it's just a bit of a move in that direction. And I'm not against taking care of the climate. I'm not. However,
who wants
let's just
the
be
bad
honest
climate?
about what. Right, but let's just be honest.
Who is in favor of that? By the way, I mean, I know it's like I don't know if Republicans want
right.
that.
Yeah, well, exactly, and it's just, and when I call things out as an agenda, those that I think maybe have a bit of an agenda kind of lose their mind and really really push back hard against me. But for me, I spend the time getting to know what kind of the impact is. So when we had these changes to our 4th and 5th Streets downtown and they were, narrowed down to one lane and and for people that aren't from Grand Junction, they're important thoroughfares through our city. And for especially folks coming from Orchard Mesa, across our bridge through our downtown, let's say they're going to the hospital, it is not a good design. And as a retired police officer, the design is terrible. Quite frankly, they have a row of parallel parked cars with a hidden bike lane behind it. And it's just a matter of time before a car takes a right-hand turn right into a bike or one of our electric scooters and unfortunately kills somebody.
I was about to say that because, if it actually worked like the way they wanted and there were cars parked in what used to be the other lane of traffic, and there were bikes somebody's riding a bike on the other side, you won't see them when you make a turn until you're getting out and trying to get their bike off your front bumper.
Right.
And it just doesn't make any sense. It's not safer. But of course, since we have, a number of, men of the road, let's call them. Yeah. Men of the road in Grand Junction, many of them riding bicycles and e-bikes all over the place. I'm surprised they haven't had a problem with that, but you're right. And one of the things before we run out of time here is, and I've said for a long time, the Grand Junction City Council, the city charter was written in 1913. And it was written at a time when, I know because I had family here then, and they wrote it, the purpose of it was a pretty good purpose. You have a council, they have a limited amount of influence over personnel and things like that, and you hire a city manager to do things. Our city's outgrown that. We don't need, a city manager with unfettered control over the departments. And and I know that the police chief works for the city manager. He doesn't work for you. He can be fired by the city manager, and if it comes down to it, that's who they're going to try and keep happy. And I understand that, but it's not a good idea. And we pretend like we have a mayor when we don't. The charter, if you ever looked at it, doesn't have anything to do with the mayor. It's a president of council. Right. They started calling it a mayor when people were complaining that maybe we should have a mayor. So let's just call ourselves one. Right. Not the same. Yep. And
100%.
And we ought to be able to have a little more direct control over what happens in the city than just hiring somebody and then calling them in every so often and asking them what's going on.
Well, for those of us that love our Constitution and limited government and have conversations about what the bureaucracy is and how it grows, do have concerns around that. And that was something I was recently pushing. As you can imagine, I didn't have a lot of support for an elected mayor position because you hit the nail on the head we don't have a mayor. We have a president of the board that is selected by council. One of the 7 of us are selected each year to be the mayor. And while the mayor is a common term that a lot of us think of, in this case, it's kind of that figurehead, but they basically run the meetings. They don't have any additional authority than any other council person.
It's just like the chairman. It's like the chairman, right? That's essentially what it is.
Yep, exactly. Yep, exactly that. So it's something I think I'm going to keep pushing for that, for an elected mayor position. And I'm not necessarily convinced that we have to take that in the strong mayor direction, at least not right away. Maybe eventually that makes sense. I believe we have an excellent city manager currently. We've recently hired Mike Bennett, who was formerly in Pruda, and he is doing a great job. And there is value in having a city manager that has that continuity going forward, even as council members come and go. So it's just about finding the balance, right?
Well, the city manager position, though, and I talk to anybody out there that has this in there, is the way they get another job is not to save money in their city. The way they get their next job is to talk about how much money they got into their last job. Tax raises, rec centers, you name it.
How many employees do they manage?
Yeah. How do they get that going? Right. It's counterintuitive, really, to what you kind of want them to do. So as I predicted, when the last city manager got the rec center through and a few things like that, of course, he skipped. Now he's in Scottsdale, right? And this happens. And if they stay here too long, because you and I both remember when Mark Aiken was the city manager here, I mean, they become a little bit sort of like royalty, because people come and go when they don't. Now, he happened to be a good one, but it's still nevertheless. Yeah. Well, we got about a minute here, Cody, and I want you to just tell us, why we should all vote for you. I think people have figured that out by now, but just throw something out there, and then after we're off the air here, stay on a minute, and we'll chat just a second.
Okay, perfect. Rick, thanks for the opportunity. I sincerely appreciate it. I really hope that your listeners if they're in Grand Junction, if they're city residents, I sincerely hope they vote. Of course, I hope they vote for me. There's a couple other great conservative voices that are also running. Ben Van Dyke, Robert Ballard, good people, solid values, and I think would serve our city well. As far as me, my platform, public safety, is a big one for me. I'm continually focusing on that. When I came into office a couple of years ago, we were down by 30 or plus officers. We finally hit our budgeted number for the number of TJPD officers that we should have, and in part of that was pushing for having a competitive salary so we weren't losing our officers to neighboring agencies.
Like Broomfield.
So that's part of it. Yeah, or Montrose. Yeah. Montrose, we were losing officers to Montrose. So that's part of it. I also believe in if we're providing resources to the community, especially towards our homeless community, we need to be thinking of. I'm talking too long.
No, that's okay. We're getting pulled out. I don't have control over the computer. So, everybody, we'll talk to you next week. And vote.
Thanks for listening. Thanks. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.